You know today is our independence. Today is our independence.
We're outside the GPO.
No, seriously.
The great one and only Pat Dorsey, people's advocate. What brings you here today, Pat?
Yeah, well, of course, today is Independence Day, the 21st of January, 2022. There were celebrations above at the Mansion House, reading of the proclamation, reading of the here. And I was asked by someone a few weeks ago to speak, but I received a text message yesterday evening, which was a bit disturbing, basically trying to set parameters as to what I should say, not involving anything to do with politics or other different things. A number of criteria, and to be honest, I was quite disgusted. And I said, you know, you asked me to speak, put a lot of time into this, hearing what I had to say in relation to what I was thinking about for a long time, about our independence. We have state independence, yes. That happened on the 16th of January, 1919, when Lord Fitzallen handed over the keys to Michael Collins and a few others. That was 3 days before the proclamation was read out in Dáil Éireann at the Mansion House. But what's significant is what I'm going to speak about here today. That what happened was 700 years of power were transferred to the Irish state. But the people have not been empowered, and the aspirations that were in the Declaration of Independence read out in the Dáil, in the message to the nations, and in the democratic program that was all part of it as to how Ireland would thrive. Those aspirations were very much geared towards the people. I fight for the people in the courts. I'm a people's advocate, trained to the level of solicitor and barrister, but I'm not a member of their club, because they are anything but truthful, and there is a lot of corruption and collusion. Now I'm going to read out my speech here for this gentleman from Tipperary, which was once my home county also, back in the 1980s. And I must say that I'm surprised that the person who said this to me said it to me, because I'm a proud member of the Tipperary branch of the IRB. And I make no hiding about it, or mistake about it. I don't know who this person was or who he thinks he is, but I will say what I want to say, whenever I want to say, wherever I want to say it. Now this is what I have prepared. The theme of what my talk today was to be was, if the law is wrong, everything is wrong, and all that flows from that law will be wrong if it affects the fundamental rights and freedoms of we the people. Here I'm referring to the COVID-19 law that was brought in by an illegitimate standing orders process on the 19th of March 2020, which has wreaked havoc on the people, but further empowered those TDs that control our parliamentary process for their own benefit. Now, if we had this initiative, which myself and two others launched in Belfast City Hall on World Mental Health Day on the 8th of October 2019. The idea behind this is that people were being made wards of court having no say by the HSE, such as my mother, who was held a prisoner for 5 years and eventually killed by the HSE by a forced vaccination injection died a horrible death, starved to death, died on the 29th of July, 2021. The courts, the judges, the solicitors have tried to silence me and say that the appeals I had in for her freedom should not go ahead because the case is mute. No, the appeals will go ahead as soon as the coroner has completed his work to establish the cause of my mother's death. This initiative here is for a people's council from 32 counties. People elected from each county, probably 3 or 4 people. This would have to have constitutional footing by a statutory referendum. A referendum to the people to establish this, to give the people a voice. If we had this verificative, which is a word that we made up, it's derived from the word to verify. Before that COVID-19 legislation bill was put before the door, it could have been, if we had the verificative council, sent to them, and they could have scrutinized it to ensure that it would not be in violation of the people's fundamental constitutional rights. Not alone that, but our fundamental rights under the European Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, which we are guaranteed as European citizens because of the 28th Amendment of the Constitution. That is incorporated and becomes part of our Constitution and gives each and every person here that's here today rights from the European Union, which could tell the Irish government, the Irish state, to take a hike that legislation you brought in was in breach of the European Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms and the people's rights under what amounts to that charter, which is a constitution, which not even European courts, an Irish court, the European Parliament, any member of the European Parliament or Union can violate or breach. That is the ultimate. But we, the people, the Irish people, the sovereign people, must realize our freedom by the words that were spoken in the message and in the democratic program. Let me just read that there. I'm going a bit off what I had planned to say, but I'll come back to it. So what I want to say here is, on this remembrance of Independence Day, 103 years ago, a day that was a day of celebratory statements read out in Dáil Éireann in the Mansion House, comprising the Bunreacht, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the message to the free nations of the world, and the democratic program, which was spoken about so strongly with great aspirations for the good of we the people as the Irish nation. So let me recall a few of the great words from the message to the free nations. And we the people should focus on this so that we can attain our rights. Ireland today reasserts her historic nationhood the more confidently before the New World emerging from the war, because she believes in freedom and justice as the international principles of international law, because she believes in a frank cooperation between the peoples for equal rights against the vested privileges of ancient tyrannies. We have not gotten rid of that tyranny. That tyranny is in Dáil Éireann. And it's still in Dublin Castle. They just transferred the tyranny to supposed leaders of the Irish people for independence. But no, these people are following and singing from the same hymn sheet as what was done to the people 700 years before the keys were handed over to Dublin Castle. Now, there's a couple of more words in this message which are very significant. But only by establishing the control of government. That's what this is about. In every land, upon the basis of the free will of free people, we must attain that. Now let me further recall words from the Democratic program. We declare in the words of the Irish Republican Proclamation the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies to be indefeasible. And in the language of our first president, Pádraig MacPherys, we declare that the nation's sovereignty extends not only to all men and women of the nation. What's happened is that sovereignty has been transferred to a state machinery, not to the people, as it should have been from the aspirations of Independence Day. We declare that we desire our country to be ruled in accordance with the principles of liberty, equality, and justice for all, which alone can secure permanence of government in the willing adhesion of the people. The people have not been adhered to this government. They have been alienated. On the 20th of March, 2020, by lies. Now, what I want to speak about is what has happened in relation to these rules and regulations in regard to face masks and vaccinations being brought in by ministers. So, what I'm speaking about is my own doctrine, and it's called the Fundamental Rights Doctrine, and it's in regard to when ministers, when the Parliament disregard the principles of natural law, and what it encompasses is a knowingly wrongful assumption that the action being done by governments to pass mandatory face masks or vaccine primary laws or secondary laws in the form of regulations is not a breach of basic personal fundamental human rights, which are inherently possessed by the individual or a business entity, and it's part of this principle which I call the abuse of fundamental rights doctrine. Now let me explain. This occurs when the Constitution is seen to be giving immunity to protect primary legislation, such as the COVID-19, passed into law by national or regional parliaments, which empowers local officials through secondary legislation in the form of regulations to disregard personal fundamental rights. Now, our rights are enumerated, the Irish people, not alone in the Constitution, not alone by the 28th Amendment of the European Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, but also because Ireland has ratified the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the European Charter. In essence, both of those are international law, and Ireland has signed up to respect international law. Now, people have been subjected to forced vaccination, people have died. There is another amendment in the Irish Constitution which brought in the Treaty of Rome and the International Criminal Court Act. The Gardaí are unwilling to investigate these crimes of humanity now being perpetrated on the youngest children. They intend to coerce the people into forced mandatory vaccination. They've already done it to the elderly in nursing homes. This is in breach of all human law, of all natural law. So, what I would ask is, we have established a website for the vericative, and we're going to set up a constitution in that, a pro forma constitution, as to the way the vericative would work. I would ask for the people to support this. This is in your interest, to check the power of the three branches of government. So, because what we have is, at present, rules being handed down, laws being passed, regulations being passed, which really amount to a situation where people in hospitals, nursing homes, and other things, they're being what's known as subjected to extrajudicial killing. Basically, wittingly or unwittingly, doctors and nurses are involved in this. So, I want to give the definition here of extrajudicial killing. It's the arbitrary deprivation of life under international law, and people are asking me in the Irish context what this means. So it can take many forms, and as such may not be recognized immediately at the time of death. So I'm defining it here as is occurring within the public health system under HSE control and the control of the wards of courts, judges to mean the hospital or nursing home, arrest, detention, abduction, or any other form of deprivation of liberty by agents of the state or by persons or groups of persons acting with the authorization. This applies to schools, support or acquiescence of the state, public transport, any other form of state control, and it's followed by a refusal to acknowledge the deprivation of liberty under Article 40 of the Constitution, which leads to this person suffering sanctions upon their liberty or on their right to choose their form of treatment. Now, this has been codified in international law for a long time, and people don't realize that's what's happening is we have a complete absence of rule of law in our courts since 1924, because the Courts of Justice Act has never been commenced by an original commencement order, which means they were never reenacted on the 29th of September 1961 by the Courts Establishment and Constitution Act and the Court Supplemental Provisions Act. What happened there is they tried to import in Section 7 the former courts of justice, the District Court of Justice, the Circuit Court of Justice, the High Court of Justice, and the Supreme Court of Justice. But by incorporating any of the provisions of those courts of justice that were supposedly established in 1924, they have created a constitutional crisis, because provisions from those Courts of Justice Act 1924 have been incorporated into the Court Supplemental Provisions Act 1961, which is read in conjunction with the Courts Establishment and Constitution Act 1961. This, in fact, creates the constitutional crisis because, in fact, neither any statutory court, nor for that matter, the Supreme Court, Court of Appeal, High Court, Circuit Court, District Court, are without infection. They are all infected because of this imported mechanism into the Court Supplemental Provisions Act 1961, because that act was never commenced in 1924. So let me close. This is a lot longer. I've gone off my script here, but I just felt people need to know that they're being prosecuted also in courts of summary jurisdiction that don't exist. As well as that, the Director of Public Prosecutions is not empowered to conduct prosecutions because his empowerment under the Criminal Justice Administration Act, Section 2 and 9 of 1924, is also affected. So in effect, we have DPPs acting contrary to the law and basically committing offenses against the state, which are prosecutable under the Offenses Against the State Act in special tribunals, which is great for the people because they're not the ordinary courts. And we don't have to be stuck with the judges that are there. The tribunal can be constituted by others. Thank you.
Pat, one last question. What's your website if people want to know more about what you're talking about today?
patc.ie. It's the vericative.com, is it? No.
Patsy.ie anyway is one where people can find more.
And we'll put a link on it to the Vericative website. And there's also a link to stopeldertorture.com. So,
Pat, thank you for your time and your energy and all that you give to this country.
You're more than welcome.
Great to have you in the fight.
It's in my blood. all belong to me. We're Republicans. My mother was a Max Sweeney girl.
So, tough out. Thanks, Pat. We'll leave it there.
23.